Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Sanghaṃ namasami. So we'll do a reading tonight, and then there won't be a reading tomorrow evening because it's Saturday night. But tonight I'm going to be reading from Ajaan Maha Boowa, straight from the heart. It's, in my opinion, it's really classic. It's one of my favorite Dhamma books of all time, and some really great talks, and also, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest translations ever done by Ajahn Jeff. And it just, there's a lot of really great stuff in here. I'm going to read the first talk, and we'll see. I'm just going to start at the beginning and then see how long we get. It might read just the first talk, or it might go into the second talk a little bit. And the first talk is called The Language of the Heart. The Venerable Acharya Mun taught that all hearts have the same language. No matter what one's language or nationality, that a heart has nothing but simple awareness, which is why he said that all hearts have the same language. When a thought arises, we understand it, but when we put it into words, it has to become this or that language, so that we don't really understand one another. The feelings within the heart, though, are the same for everyone. This is why the Dhamma fits the heart perfectly, because the Dhamma isn't any particular language. The Dhamma is the language of the heart. The Dhamma resides with the heart. Pleasure and pain reside with the heart. The acts that create pleasure and pain are thought up by the heart. The heart is what knows the results that appear as pleasure and pain, and the heart is burdened with the outcome of its own thoughts. This is why the heart and the Dhamma fit perfectly. No matter what our language or nationality, we can all understand the Dhamma because the heart and the Dhamma are a natural pair. The heart forms the core within the body. It's the core, the substance, the primary essence within the body. It's the basic foundation. The conditions that arise from the mind, such as thought formations, appear and vanish again and again. Here I'm referring to the rippling of the mind. When the mind ripples, that's the formation of a thought. Labels, which deal with conjecturing, memorizing, and recognizing, are termed sanya. Long thoughts are sanya. Short thoughts are sankhara. In other words, when a thought forms, blip, that's a sankhara. Sanya refers to labeling and recognizing. Vijnana refers to the act of taking note when anything external comes and makes contact with the senses, as when visible forms make contact with the eye and cognition results. All of these things are constantly arising and vanishing of their own accord, and so the Buddha called them khandas. Each heap or group is called a khanda. These 5 heaps of khandas are constantly arising and vanishing all the time. Even arahants have these same conditions, just like ordinary people everywhere. The only difference being that the arahants' khandas are khandas pure and simple, without any defilements giving them orders, making them do this or think that. Instead, their khandas think out of their own free nature, with nothing forcing them to think this or that, unlike the minds of ordinary people in general. To make a comparison, the khandas of ordinary people are like prisoners, constantly being ordered about. Their various thoughts, labels, assumptions, and interpretations have something that orders and forces them to appear, making them think, assume, and interpret in this way or that. In other words, they have defilements as their boss, their leader, ordering them to appear. Arahants, however, don't. When a thought forms, it simply forms. Once it forms, it simply disappears. There's no seed to continue it, no seed to weigh the mind down, because there's nothing to force it, unlike the khandhas governed by defilements or under the leadership of defilements. This is where the difference lies. But their basic nature is the same. All the khandhas we have mentioned are inconstant, anicca. In other words, instability and changeability are a regular part of their nature, beginning with the rupa khandha, our body, and the vedana khandha, feelings of pleasure, pain, and indifference. These things appear and vanish again and again. Sanya, sankhara, and vijnana are also always in a state of appearing and vanishing as a normal part of their nature. But as for actual awareness, which forms the basis of our knowledge of the various things that arise and vanish, that doesn't vanish. We can say that the mind can't vanish. We can say that the mind can't arise. A mind that has been purified thus has no more problems concerning the birth and death of the body and the khandhas, and thus there is no more birth here and there, appearing in crude forms such as individuals or as living beings, for those whose minds have been purified. But those whose minds are not purified, they are the ones who take birth and die, setting their sights on cemeteries without end, all because of this undying mind. This is why the Lord Buddha taught the world, and in particular the world of human beings, who know right and wrong, good and evil, who know how to foster the one remedy, who know how to foster the one and remedy the other, who understand the language of the Dhamma he taught. This is why he taught the human world above and beyond the other worlds, so that we could try to remedy the things that are harmful and detrimental, removing them from our thoughts, words, and deeds. Try to nourish and foster whatever goodness we might already have, and give rise to whatever goodness we don't yet have. He taught us to foster and develop the goodness we already have so as to nourish the heart, giving it refreshment and well-being, giving it a standard of quality or goodness, so that when it leaves its present body to head for whatever place or level of being, this mind has been constantly nourished with goodness, and it will be a good mind. Wherever it fares, it will fare well. Wherever it takes birth, it will be born well. Wherever it lives, it will live well. It will keep on experiencing well-being and happiness until it gains the capacity, the potential, the accumulation of merit it has developed progressively from the past into the present. In other words, yesterday is today's past, today is tomorrow's past, all of which are days in which we have fostered and developed goodness step by step, to the point where the mind has the firm strength and ability from the supporting power of this goodness that enables it to pass over and gain release. Such a mind has no more birth, not even in the most quiet or refined levels of being that contain any latent traces of conventional reality, samadhi, namely birth and death as we currently experience it. Such a mind goes completely beyond all such things. Here I'm referring to the minds of the Buddhas and of the Arahants. There's a story about Venerable Vangisa that has a bearing on this. Venerable Vangisa, when he was a layman, was very talented in divining the level of being in which the mind of a dead person was reborn, no matter who that person was. You couldn't quite say he was a fortune teller. Actually, he was more of a master of psychic skills. When anyone died, he would take the person's skull and knock on it. Knock, knock, knock. Focus his mind, and then know that this person was reborn there, that person was reborn here. If the person was reborn in hell or in heaven, as a common animal or a hungry ghost, he could tell in every case, without any hesitation. All he needed was to knock on the skull. When he heard his friends say that the Buddha was many times more talented than this, he wanted to expand on his knowledge. So he went to the Buddha's presence to ask for further training in this science. When he reached the Buddha gave him the skull of an arahant to knock on. All right, see if you can tell where he was reborn. Venerable Vangisa knocked on the skull and listened. Silence. He knocked again and listened. Silence. He thought for a moment. Silence. He focused his mind. Silence. He couldn't see where the owner of the skull was reborn. At his wit's end, he confessed frankly that he didn't know where the Arhat was reborn. At first, Venerable Vangisa had thought himself talented and smart, and had planned to challenge the Buddha before asking for further training. But when he reached the Buddha gave him the skull of an Arhat to knock on, and right there he was stymied. So now he genuinely wanted further training. Once he had further training, he'd really be something special. This being the way things stood, he asked to study with the Buddha. So the Buddha taught him the science, taught him the method. In other words, the science of the Dhamma. Venerable Vangisa practiced and practiced until finally he attained arahantship. From then on, he was no longer interested in knocking on anyone's skull, except for his own. Once he had known clearly, that was the end of the matter. This is called knocking on the right skull. Once the Buddha had brought up the topic of the mind that doesn't experience rebirth, the skull of one whose mind was purified, no matter how many times Venerable Vangisa knocked on it, he couldn't know where the mind was reborn, even though he had been very talented before, for the place of a pure mind's rebirth cannot be found. The same was true in the case of Venerable Godika. This story should serve as quite some food for thought. Venerable Godika went to practice meditation, made progress step by step, but then regressed. They say this happened 6 times. After the 7th time, he took a razor to slash his throat. He was so depressed, but then came to his senses, contemplated the Dhamma, and became an arhat at the last minute. That's the story in brief. When he died, Mara's hordes searched for his spirit. To put it simply, they stirred up a storm, but couldn't tell where he had been reborn. So the Lord Buddha said, no matter how much you dig or search or investigate to find the spirit of our son, Godika, who has completely finished his task, you won't be able to find it, even if you turn the world upside down, because such a task lies beyond the scope of conventional reality. How could they possibly find it? It's beyond the capacity of people with defilements to know the power of an arhat's mind. In the realm of convention, there is no one who can trace the path of an arhat's mind, because an arhat lies beyond convention, even though his is a mind just the same. Think about it. Even our stumbling and crawling mind, when it is continually cleansed without stop, without ceasing, without letting perseverance lag, will gradually become more and more refined until it reaches the limit of refinement. Then the refinement will disappear, because refinement is a matter of conventional reality, leaving a nature of solid gold or solid Dhamma called the pure mind. We too will then have no more problems, just like the arahants, because our mind will have become a superlative mind, just like the minds of those who have already gained release. All minds of this sort are the same, with no distinction between women and men, which is simply a matter of sex or convention. With the mind, there is no distinction between women and men, and thus both women and men have the same capacity in the area of the Dhamma. Both are capable of attaining the various levels of Dhamma all the way to release. There are no restrictions that can be imposed in this area. All that is needed is that we develop enough ability and potential, then we can all go beyond. For this reason, we should all make an effort to train our hearts and minds. At the very least, we should get the mind to attain stillness and peace with any of the meditation themes that can lull it into a state of calm, giving rise to peace and well-being within it. For example, mindfulness of breathing, which is one of the primary themes in meditation circles, seems to suit the temperament of more people than any other theme. But whatever the theme, take it as a governing principle, a refuge, a mainstay for the mind, putting it into practice within your own mind so as to attain rest and peace. When the mind begins to settle down, we will begin to see its essential nature and worth. We will begin to see that the heart we will begin to see what the heart is and how it is. In other words, when the mind gathers all of its currents into a single point as simple awareness within itself, this is what is called the mind, citta. The gathering in of the mind occurs on different levels, corresponding to the mind's ability and to the different stages of its refinement. Even if the mind is still on a crude level, we can nevertheless know it when it gathers inwardly. When the mind becomes more and more refined, we will know its refinement. This mind is refined. This mind is radiant. This mind is extremely still. This mind is something extremely amazing. More and more, step by step, this very same mind. In cleansing and training the mind for the sake of stillness, in investigating, probing, and solving the problems of the mind with discernment, paññā, which is the way of making the mind progress, or of enabling us to reach the truth of the mind step by step through the means already mentioned. No matter how crude the mind may be, don't worry about it. If we get down to making the effort and persevere continually with what diligence and persistence we have, that crudeness will gradually fade away and vanish. Refinement will gradually appear through our own actions or our own striving until we are able to go beyond and gain release by slashing the defilements to bits. This holds true for all of us, men and women alike. But while we aren't yet able to do so, we shouldn't be anxious. All that is asked is that we make the mind principled so that it can be a refuge and a mainstay for itself. As for this body, we've been relying on it ever since the day we were born. This is something we all can know. We've made it live, lie down, urinate, defecate, work, make a living. We've used it, and it has used us. We order it around, and it orders us around. For instance, we've made it work, and it has made us suffer with aches here and pains there, so that we have to search for medicine to treat it. It's the one that hurts, and it's the one that searches for medicine. It's the one that provides the means, and so we keep supporting each other back and forth in this way. It's hard to tell who is in charge, the body or us. We can order it around part of the time, but it orders us around all the time. Illness, hunger, thirst, sleepiness, these are all nothing but a heap of suffering and stress in which the body orders us around and orders us from every side. We can order it around only a little bit. So when the time is right for us to give the orders, we should make it meditate. So get to work. As long as the body is functioning normally, then no matter how much or how heavy the work, get right to it. But if the body isn't functioning normally, if you're ill, you need to be conscious of what it can take. As for the mind, though, keep up the effort within, unflaggingly, because it's your essential duty. You've depended on the body for a long time. Now that it's wearing down, know that it's wearing down. Which parts still work? Which parts no longer work? You're the one in charge, and you know it full well. So make whatever compromises you should. But as for the heart, which isn't ill along with the body, it should step up its efforts within so that it won't lack the benefits that it should gain. Make the mind have standards and be principled in its living, principled in its dying. Wherever it's born, make it have good principles and satisfactory standards. What they call merit, puññā, won't betray your hopes or expectations. It will provide you with satisfactory circumstances at all times, in keeping with the fact that you've accumulated the merit, the well-being that all the world wants, and of which no one has enough. In other words, what the world wants is well-being, whatever the sort, and in particular the well-being of the mind that will arise step by step from having done things, such as meditation, which are noble and good. This is the well-being that forms a core or an important essence within the heart. We should strive, then, while the body is still functioning, for when life comes to an end, nothing more can be done. No matter how little or how much we have accomplished, we must stop at that point. We stop our work, put it aside, and then reap its rewards there in the next life. Whatever we should be capable of doing, we do. If we can go beyond or gain release, that's the end of every problem. There will then be nothing to involve us in any turmoil. Here I've been talking about the mind because the mind is the primary issue. That which will make us fare well or badly, meet with pleasure or pain, is nothing else but the mind. As for what they call bad karma, it lies within the mind that has made it. Whether or not you can remember, these seeds, which lie within the heart, can't be prevented from bearing fruit, because they are rooted in the mind. You have to accept your karma. Don't find fault with it. Once it's done, it's done. So how can you find fault with it? The hand writes, and so the hand must erase. You have to accept it like a good sport. This is the way it is with karma until you can gain release, which will be the end of the problem. And we'll go on to the next talk, the marvel of the Dhamma. This one's a bit longer, so we probably won't go through the whole thing. Those who practice the Dhamma will begin to know the Dhamma or to gain a feel for the Dhamma in the area of meditation more markedly than in other areas and more extensively. For example, the gratification that comes from being generous is moving in one way. The gratification that comes from maintaining the precepts is moving in another way. The feelings of gratification that come from the different forms of goodness are moving in their own separate ways. This is called finding gratification in skillfulness. But all of these feelings of gratification converge in the practice of meditation. We begin to feel moved from the moment the mind begins to grow still, when the heart gathers its currents together to stand solely on its own. Even though we may not yet obtain a great deal of stillness from the inward gathering of the mind, we still find ourselves gratified within, in a way we can clearly sense. If the mind or the Dhamma were a material object, there wouldn't be anyone in the world who wouldn't respect the religion, because the goodness, the well-being, and the marvels that arise from the religion and from the practicing in line with the teachings of the religion are things desired the world over. Goodness, well-being, marvels. These are the things the world has always desired from time immemorial, with a desire that has never lost its taste. And they are all things that will always be desired until the world loses its meaning, or until people become extinct, having no more sense of good and evil. That's when the world will no longer aspire for these great blessings. The well-being that comes from the marvels, the Dhamma in the area and its results, is something to which all living beings aspire, simply that their abilities differ, so that some attain their aspirations, while others don't. But the Dhamma can't be displayed for the world to perceive with its senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, or touch in the way other things can. Even though there may be other immaterial phenomena similar to the Dhamma, such as smells, still, they aren't like the true Dhamma that is touched by the hearts of those who have practiced it. If the Dhamma could be displayed like material objects, there's no doubt but that the human world would have to respect the religion for the sake of that Dhamma. This is because the Dhamma is something more marvelous than anything else. In all the three levels of existence, there's no greater marvel than in the Dhamma. The Dhamma can appear as a marvel, conspicuous and clear in the mind. The mind is what knows it, and only the mind. It can't be displayed in general like material objects, and when we take things out to admire or show off to others, as when we take things out to show or admire, show off to others. The Dhamma can't possibly be displayed like material objects. This is what makes the world lack interest, and lack the things that could be hoped for from Dhamma, in a way that is really a shame. Even those who want the marvel of the Dhamma don't know what the marvel is, or what the profundity of the Dhamma is, because the mind has never had contact with that profundity. The eye has never had contact with the marvel. The ear has never obtained any marvel from the current of the Dhamma, because the Dhamma can't be displayed as a current of sound as other things can. This is one obstacle that prevents people from becoming moved by the Dhamma, that prevents them from fully believing and fully entrusting themselves to the Dhamma in a way consistent with the world's long-felt hunger for well-being and prosperity. Each of the Buddhas who has gained awakening and taught the Dhamma to the world has had to reflect to the full extent of his intelligence and ability on the myriad ways of teaching the Dhamma to the world so that the world could see it as a marvel, inasmuch as the Dhamma can't be put in shop windows or in public places. This is because the true Dhamma lies in the heart and reveals itself only in words and deeds, which don't excite a gratifying sense of absorption in the same way as touching the Dhamma directly with the heart. Because there is no way to display the Dhamma directly, the Buddhas display it indirectly through teaching. They point out the causes, the Dhamma of conduct and practices leading to the Dhamma of results at this or that point, or this or that level. And at the same time, they proclaim the results, the excellence, the marvels of the stages and levels of the Dhamma that can be touched with the heart, all the way to the highest marvel, vimutti, the mental release called nibbana within the heart. Every Buddha has to devise strategies in teaching the Dhamma so as to bring that marvel out to the world by using various modes of speech and conduct. For example, describing the Dhamma and showing the conduct of the Dhamma as being like this and that. But the actual Dhamma can't be shown. It is something known exclusively in the heart, in the way in which each Buddha and each Arahant possesses this marvel. None of the Buddhas, none of the Arahants who possess this marvel are in any way deficient in this regard. The marvel lies in their hearts, simply that they can't take the marvel that appears there and display it in the full measure of its wonder. Thus they devise strategies for displaying it in their actions, which are simply attributes of the Dhamma, not the actual Dhamma itself. For instance, the doctrine they teach in the texts is simply an attribute of the Dhamma. Their act of teaching is also just an attribute of the Dhamma. The actual Dhamma is when a meditator or a person who listens to their teachings about the Dhamma follows the Dhamma in practice and touches it stage by stage within his or her own heart. This is called beginning to make contact with the actual Dhamma, step by step. However much contact is made, it gives a sense of gratification felt exclusively within the heart of the person who has gained that contact through his or her own practice. When it comes to ingenuity in teaching, no one excels the Buddhas. Even so, they reveal only what they see as appropriate for humanity. They can't reveal the actual Dhamma. For example, by taking out the true marvel in their hearts and unfolding it for the world to see, saying, "This is the marvel of the Tathagata, of each Buddha. Do you see it?" This can't be done. For here we're talking about the marvel of the purity of a heart that was previously swamped with defilement like a heap of assorted excrement, but now has become a pure, unsullied nature, or a pure, amazing nature, because of the practice of constantly and relentlessly cleansing it. They can't show that Dhamma to the world, saying, "Do you see this? Look at it, look at it. Feast your eyes until they're full, and then strive to make this treasure your own." So instead, they teach by using various strategies for those who practice, describing the path in full detail, in terms both of causes and of results. What they bring out to show is simply the current of their voices, the breath of their mouths. That's what they bring out to speak, simply the breath of their mouths. They can't bring out the real thing. For example, when they say, "It's marvelous like this," it's just sound. The marvelous nature itself can't be brought out. All they can bring out is the action of saying, "That nature is marvelous," so that we can speculate for ourselves as to what that marvel is like. Even though this doesn't remove our doubts, it's better than if we had never heard about it at all. But the basic principle in making us come to know and see the marvel of the Dhamma is that first we have to speculate and then we follow with practice. This qualifies as following the principles of the Dhamma the Buddha taught, and this is fitting and proper. No matter what the difficulties and hardships encountered in following the path, we shouldn't let them form barriers to our progress, because this is where the path lies. There are no other byways that can take us easily to the goal. If our practice is difficult, we have to stick with it. If it's painful, we have to bear it, because it's a duty we have to perform, a burden we have to carry while working so as to attain our aims. The Dhamma of a pure mind is like this. The mind is the Dhamma is the mind. We call it a mind only as long as it is still with the body and the khandhas. Only then can we call it a pure mind, the mind of a Buddha, or the mind of an Arahant. After it passes from the body and khandhas, there is no conventional reality to which it can be compared, and so we can't call it anything at all. No matter how marvelous that nature, no matter how much it may be ours, there is no possible way we can use conventional realities to describe it or to make comparisons, because that Dhamma, that realm of release, has no conventions against which to measure things or make comparisons. It's the same as if we were in outer space. Which way is north? Which way is south? We don't know. If we're on Earth, we can say east, west, north, and south, because there are things that we can observe and compare so as to tell which direction lies which way. We take the earth as our standard. High and low depend on the earth as their frame of reference. How much higher than this, lower than this, north of this, south of this, these things we can say. But if we're out in outer space, there is no standard by which we can measure things, so we can't say. Or as when we go up in an airplane, we can't tell how fast or how slow we're going. When we pass a cloud, we can tell that we're going fast. But if we depend simply on our eyesight, we're sure to think that the speed of the airplane is nowhere near the speed of a car. When we can clearly see how deceptive our eyesight is in just this way. When we ride in a car, the trees on both sides of the road look as if they were falling in together down on the road behind us. Actually, they stay their separate selves. It's simply that the car runs past them. Since there are things that we sense, we lie close enough for comparison. It seems as if the car were going really fast. As for the airplane, there's nothing to make comparisons with, so it looks as if the plane were dawdling along, as if it were going slower than a car, even though it's actually many times faster. This is how it is when we compare the mind of an ordinary run-of-the-mill person with the mind of a Buddha. Whatever the Buddha says is good and excellent, we ordinary people tend to say that it's not. Whatever we like, no matter how vile, we say that it's good. We don't admit the truth, in the same way as thinking that a car goes faster than an airplane. The practice of attending to the mind is something very important. Try to develop mindfulness, sati, and discernment so that they can keep up with the things that come in and entangle the mind. By and large, the heart itself is the instigator, creating trouble continuously, relentlessly. We then fall for the preoccupations the heart turns out, and this makes us agitated, upset, and saddened, all because of the thoughts formed by the heart. These come from the heart itself, and the heart itself is what falls for them, saying this is this and that is that, even though the things it names this and that merely exist in line with their nature. They have no meaning in and of themselves, that they are like this or that. The mind simply gives them meanings and then falls for its own meanings, making itself glad or sad over those things without end. Thus, the stress and suffering that result from thought formations have no end, no point of resolution, just as if we were floating adrift in the middle of the sea, waiting to breathe our last breath. The Buddhas all reached awakening here in this human world, because the human world is rich in the noble truths. It's where they are plain to see. The noble truth of stress, dukkha, lies in the human body. human beings know about stress because they're smarter than common animals. The noble truth of the origin of stress, this lies in the human heart. The noble truth of the path of practice to cure defilement, craving, and mental effluence, which are the things that produce stress. This human beings also know. What is the path? To put it briefly, virtue, concentration, and discernment. These things human beings know and can put into practice. The noble truth of the cessation of stress, this human beings also know. No matter which of these truths, all human beings know them, although they may not know how to behave toward them or take interest in behaving in line with them, in which case there is no way the Dhamma can help them at all. The Buddhas thus taught the Dhamma in the human world because the human world lies in the center of all the levels of existence. We have been born in the center of existence, in the midst of the religion. We should conform correctly to the central point of the religion so as to comprehend the religion's teachings that lie in the center of our heart. The superlative Dhamma lies right here. It doesn't lie anywhere else. The mind is what can reach the Dhamma. The mind is what knows all Dhammas. The affairs of the Dhamma, then, do not lie beyond the mind, which is a fitting vessel for them. Good, evil, pleasure, pain, the mind knows these things before anything else knows them. So we should develop mindfulness and discernment to be resourceful, to keep up with the events that are always becoming involved with the mind in the course of each day. If we're intent on investigating the origin of stress, which fans out from our various thought formations, we will find that it arises without stop. It arises right here in the mind. It's fashioned right here. Even though we try to make it quiet, it won't be still. Why? Because of this unquietness, the thoughts with which the mind disturbs itself, which it forms and sends out toward its preoccupations, aramana, all the time. Once the mind sends out its thoughts, it then gathers in stress for itself. It keeps at it, in and out like this. What goes out is the origin of stress, and what comes back in is stress. In other words, thoughts form and go out as the origin of stress, and when the results come back to the heart, they're stressful. These things are constantly being manufactured like this all the time. When we want the mind to have even just a little bit of calm, we really have to force it. And even then, these things still manage to drive the mind into forming thoughts whenever we let down our guard. This is how it is with the origin of stress, which is constantly producing suffering. It lies in the heart and is always arising. For this reason, we must use mindfulness and discernment to diagnose and remedy the origin of stress, to keep an eye out for it, and to snuff it out right there without being negligent. Wherever we sit or stand, whatever our activity, we keep watch over this point, with mindfulness alert to it, and discernment unraveling it so as to know it constantly for what it truly is. All those who practice to remove defilement practice in this way. In particular, those who are ordained practice by going into the forest to look for a place conducive to their striving in order to wipe out this very enemy. Even when they stay in inhabited areas, or wherever they go, wherever they stay, they keep their attention focused continually, step by step, on the persistent effort to remove and demolish the origin of stress, which is a splinter, a thorn in the heart. Such people are bound to develop more and more ease and well-being, step by step, in proportion to the persistence of their striving. We can see clearly when the mind is still and settles down. Thought formations are still or don't exist. Turmoil and disturbances don't occur. The stress that would otherwise result doesn't appear. When the mind is quiet, stress is also quiet. When thought formations are quiet, the origin of stress is also quiet. Stress is also quiet. All that remains at that moment is a feeling of peace and ease. The war between the mind and the defilements causing stress is like this. We have to keep fighting with persistence. We have to use mindfulness and discernment, conviction and persistence to contend with the war that disturbs and ravages the mind, making it stagger and reel within. The disturbances will then be gradually suppressed. Even when there is only a moment of quiet, we will come to see the harm of the thought formations that are constantly disturbing us. At the same time, we will see the benefits of mental stillness, that it's a genuine pleasure. Whether there is a lot of stillness or a little, pleasure arises in proportion to the foundation of stillness or the strength of the stillness, which in the texts is called samadhi. A mind centered and still is called a mind in concentration, or a mind gathered in concentration. This is what genuine concentration is like inside the heart. The names of the various stages of concentration are everywhere, but actual concentration is inside the heart. The heart is what gives rise to concentration. It produces it, makes it on its own. When concentration is still, the mind experiences cool respite and pleasure. It has its own foundation set firmly and solidly within. It's as if we are under an eave or under the cooling shade of a tree. We're comfortable when it rains. We're comfortable when the sun is out, because we don't have to be exposed to the sun and rain. The same holds true with a mind that has an inner foundation of stillness. It's not affected by this preoccupation or that, which would otherwise disturb and entangle it repeatedly, without respite. This is because stillness is the heart's dwelling, concentration, which is one level of home for the heart. Discernment, panya, is ingenuity, sound judgment, evaluating causes and effects within and without, above, below, and in between, inside the body, all the way to the currents of the mind that send out thoughts from various angles. Mindfulness and discernment keep track of these things, investigating and evaluating them so as to know the causes and effects in terms of the heart's thought formations, or in terms of the nature of sankhara within us, until we see the truth of each of these things. I'll end it there. Any questions or comments?
Started the second talk kind of reminding me of Dhammanusati. I know many of the Ajahns had particular ways that they like to practice Dhammanusati to gladden the mind.
Dhammanusati. Dhammanusati, ways to it seemed like Dhammanusati, this is the beginning of the second talk. Ways to use Dhammanusati to gladden the mind.
Yeah, I think that's the certainly those recollections of Dhamma, recollections of how to approach the Dhamma. It's really figuring out ways to uplift the mind. It's just so essential for our practice. It's rather than just trying to make ourselves conform to some idea, but it's sort of like really reflecting and seeing what is it, what's the feeling of it, what's the texture of it, what's useful, what's a good way to hold things. You have to keep experimenting like that.
I like how he brought up you can't just take it out and show it to somebody.
Yeah.
Really emphasizing it's all we can do is speculate about it, hear about it, and get inspired. But then it's I wonder. The only way to know is to practice.
I think also, aren't these talks all talks that are given to a lay woman who was dying from cancer and came to live at Bandan, at Ajahn Maha Boowa's monastery.
Oh, yeah.
And he would go over pretty much every evening and give a reflection and give encouragement. And she was there for many, many months.
Okay, yeah. There for 102 days.
102 days, yeah.
Gave 84 Ajahn Maha Boowa gave 84 impromptu talks for her benefit, all of which were tape recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they seemed gentler than. That's kind of why I like them so much. Because usually, like if I listen to Ajahn Maha Boowa, I can only listen to half of a talk or one talk maybe at a time before I feel like he's just gonna kick my butt with his talks. So there's one talk I was listening to. It's like, you have to whip the defilements. You have to keep whipping and whipping and whipping and whipping and whipping and whipping. Like he was using this one word I didn't know, and I looked it up, and it meant to whip. It's just like yelling through the whole talk.
I mean, he can be pretty extreme.
So this is like really rare. These
because it's also, there's always and I find it myself, like giving instruction or to someone who is dying. You don't have to try to stimulate them. They're reflecting.
They're receptive, and
they're very receptive.
You have a receptive audience.
Yeah. It's very immediate, so it's a much more reflective presentation. And also, she was a really solid practitioner. She'd been practicing for years. She was a friend of, say, like Kesari Bunso. She was a good friend.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, these were solid practitioners.
Yes, and he probably could see how much she was being benefited by it.
That first talk, it actually reminded me a bit of One Course Tomato style, and just kind of like that, placing that emphasis on like awareness and like the undying mind and like the primacy of mind. And it seemed like it was focusing more on like the contrast between the conditioned and unconditioned. Is that a common theme that comes up throughout the various forest ajahns, or is that something that's a little more particular to Ajahn Maha Boowa?
No, it's pretty much a party line, in the sense of the Ajahn Mun disciples and forest tradition. Very, very common theme that keeps coming up over and over.